Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Courtney, and I'm excited to be moderating the final fellowship presentation today alongside Dominic. Emily Booker will be presenting on her Pathy Foundation Fellowship initiative, a girl group to empower youth. Emily is joining us from the unceded shared territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, or Vancouver, British Columbia. I am joining from the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka, specifically Tiohtià:ke or Montreal.
Perfect, thank you, Courtney. My name is Dominic. I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Wabanaki and the Wendake. Courtney and I will be moderating Emily's presentation today. So first we will begin with a 20-minute presentation from Emily herself, followed by a 25-minute Q&A. During the presentation, we will be moderating and watching the chat box in Facebook, if you're following us on Facebook Live, or today on Zoom. If you have any questions for Emily, please write it in the chat. Alternatively, you can message Courtney and I directly on Zoom with questions or topics that you would like Emily to address during the Q&A.
Emily grew up in North Vancouver, BC, the community where her initiative is taking place. She has a Bachelor of Arts from McGill University, studying anthropology and Indigenous studies. In 2020, she graduated from McGill University with a Master's of Arts from the Department of Integrated Studies and Education. Emily's thesis research used critical discourse analysis to explore how educational material for BC teachers could challenge or reinforce the settler colonial project in schools.
Emily's Pathy's Foundation Fellowship Initiative, a girl group to empower youth, is inspired by her work with the More Than Words, a girl group to empower youth. Sorry, no, that's not something happened to my screen. My apologies. Okay, it's back. Okay, Emily's Pathy Foundation Fellowship Initiative, a girl group to empower youth, is inspired by her work with More Than Words. A girl group to empower youth uses a youth-led approach and art-based methods with female and femme youth in North Vancouver, building a foundation of self-love and confidence, and addressing youth-identified issues of sexual and gender-based violence in the community.
We've all been so fortunate to experience this fellowship year with Emily. She's passionate about her work with youth and brings her authentic self and incredible drive to her facilitation and everything that she does. In working collaboratively with Emily this year, I've been in awe of the extent of her knowledge and experience, and have so appreciated having her perspective, both on projects that we've worked on together and challenges that arose over the course of the year. Emily also has a very, very bright personality, a great sense of humor, and has shown so much kindness and empathy towards our cohort for as long as we've had the pleasure of knowing her.
Before we get into the presentation, this is just a final reminder that Courtney and I will be moderating the chat for questions in the Q&A. And finally, just to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. So if you don't mind just making sure to turn off your camera or your audio, just to make sure that nothing will be interrupted in the meantime.
And with that, Emily, we will pass it over to you.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction, Dom and Courtney. I'm so excited to be here talking to you today about my Pathy Foundation Fellowship. It was an initiative called A Girl Group to Empower Youth. As Courtney mentioned, I'm joining you today from the shared territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm currently in Vancouver, and my initiative took place in my home community of North Vancouver, which, as the name indicates, is just north of the city of Vancouver, and shares the same 3 host nations. So my initiative was a girl group working with female and femme youth ages 12 to 18, using a youth-led and arts-based model to address issues of sexual and gender-based violence. So in that overview, I introduced kind of 3 important concepts I want to break down before we go any further. The first one is, what's a girl group? So a girl group is a youth programming model that directly considers the gender of the participants. This is something that's really important because most often youth programming that isn't gender specific is going to defer to the needs and interests of boys and young men. And that's because those are the individuals who are often seen as neutral. So girl groups are gender empowering and safe spaces where youth can come together to talk about, think about, and usually take action on issues relating to gender. Next is the use of youth-led models as well as arts-based methods. A youth-led model is another youth programming model where youth are really driving the show. This means youth have a direct say in what topics or issues the work is going to be engaging with, what methods they're going to use to engage with those topics, as well as what the goal for the work is. And this is really important because it means that what you're doing is going to directly respond to the needs and interests of the youth participants. And then finally, there is the use of arts-based methods. Before I get into this, it's important to acknowledge that there isn't actually a definition of art. This is something that is constantly changing and evolving. So when we talk about using arts-based methods, it's using artistic means or methods to make sense of life in general. It's thinking about responding to, reflecting on, or talking back to how you have experienced life. And some of the artistic methods we used in the group are painting, drawing, we did sculpture, we did photography, we did embroidery, we did creative writing. And I think you're starting to get the idea that it's using basically a little bit of everything. Arts-based methods are really important, especially when you're working with youth and engaging with a topic like sexual and gender-based violence. That's because this is a topic that can be really hard to talk about. It can be hard to talk about because youth have been taught that this is a really taboo topic. It's also a topic that can sometimes have an extensive or challenging, if not academic or medical vocabulary associated with it. And it's a topic that risks being traumatizing or re-traumatizing to the youth participants. And additionally, in practice, it was something that was really important as a number of the youth participants were most comfortable expressing themselves in languages other than English. And so arts-based methods gave us a really beautiful space to be engaging with these topics safely and collectively. The different tools and methods that I just described were chosen really intentionally. And they were chosen really intentionally based off my work on the More Than Words project. And you can see the logo up there, as well as my experience growing up in North Vancouver. And there are some pictures of North Vancouver that I'll get into a little bit later. So I have been a research assistant on the More Than Words project for the last 3 years. I started working on the project when I was doing my master's at McGill University under the supervision of Dr. Claudia Mitchell, who is a principal investigator of the More Than Words project. This project works with Indigenous girls in Treaty 6, the traditional homelands of the Métis, that's Saskatoon, Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, as well as Eskasoni and Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. In these communities, girls are engaging with arts-based methods to address issues of sexual and gender-based violence. Working on this project, I got to see firsthand how just amazing and transformative these methods can be. I saw the really positive impacts on the youth participants themselves as they became increasingly confident and increasingly empowered. And then as well as the impacts on the communities. As family members of youth participants and community members more broadly were commenting on how this work was really positively impacting them themselves as well. And so I'm so incredibly grateful to the Pathy Foundation for giving me the opportunity to bring these tools and methods from More Than Words back to my home community of North Vancouver. And so here are some pictures of North Vancouver. We have the Cleveland Dam over here. There's a picture of my friends and I at our high school graduation. Just above that, that's me and one of my good friends doing log rolling on a lumberjack set. This is located on Grouse Mountain, which is like a tourist mountain in North Vancouver, where my friend and I have worked for a number of summers during university. And then there's also a picture there of my sister and my grandpa digging for clams as our family dog runs off into the low tide. So this is kind of just to ground you a little bit in North Vancouver. Something else that kind of grounded this work or informed this work was setting an ultimate goal. At the start of the fellowship, all the fellows were asked to set an ultimate goal for their work. And so mine was creating a safer community for female and femme youth. And specifically in North Vancouver, that looked like the community addressing deep-rooted systemic issues of sexual and gender-based violence through ongoing youth engagement. And so that's conversation and action that centers youth voices and perspectives. And so don't worry, I didn't think I was going to accomplish that during the 8 months I was in community. But working from that big goal, I was able to work backwards and identify some small, tangible action items that I felt like I could accomplish in 8 months that would contribute towards creating a foundation or starting off the stepping stones necessary to making it maybe to this ultimate goal one day. And so some of those action items included regular group meetings for youth and gender empowering spaces. It included female and femme youth becoming more confident, becoming more empowered and having increased feelings of self-love. It included those same youth having greater connection with their community, as well as increased comfort levels discussing sexual and gender-based violence. And so thinking about this work afterwards, it's really complicated. It's really complicated to be in community, doing these action items and just doing the work, and then pulling yourself out of it and trying to situate yourself within these ultimate goals. And this is something that's really complicated when you're working towards an ultimate goal that won't be achieved in my lifetime and probably won't be achieved in the lifetime of the youth participants either. And this is just kind of part of community work. And so reflecting on that complicated relationship, I created the little weaving you can see on the screen right now. And so it's just speaking to the messiness of this process and the importance of doing the work and staying in line with the goals, but also not getting derailed by the goals. And so if there are any weavers or textile artists on the Zoom call, you'll have to be quite forgiving because I did it on a children's craft loom. But that was just a piece that I created that I wanted to share with you. And we'll have some really fantastic art from the youth I'm going to share with you next. And so this is maybe a little abstract and confusing. So before we go forward, I'm going to ground us in something that's really easy to grasp, and that's our timeline. So a girl group to empower youth kicked off with our first meeting on September 15th. And we met every single Wednesday at the North Shore Women's Center from September 15th until December 15th. And that was our first session. We initially started meeting from 4 until 5 p.m. After a few months, the youth expressed that they wanted to start earlier. Having time between 3 and 4 wasn't enough time to actually do anything besides wait around until they could leave to go to the group. And so recognizing that some youth needed the full hour to come to the group, we decided that we were going to open the group at 3:30. And between 3:30 and 4, youth were invited to come in and they could hang out, do their homework, eat snacks, as well as work on any projects that they might have on the go that they wanted to finish. And so that was a timing we kept for the rest of the first session and a timing we kept for the second session. So the second session kicked off in the mid-January, and it ran every single Wednesday with a 2-week break in March for spring break until May 11th. So that isn't until actually just last Wednesday was our final group. In total, we met 30 times, which is like really outstanding. In the first session, we had 2 guest facilitators and we completed 7 art projects. In our second session, we had 3 guest facilitators and we created and completed 12 art projects, which is just tremendous and outstanding. And so thinking about how did we get from this concept and these meetings into the art projects that we were creating. Before I can show you those, I want to talk a little bit about what it was like using a youth-led approach. This is something that I think contributed really greatly to some of the most positive outcomes from this project. And it is something that is a tremendous amount of work. It's a lot of work for the adult facilitator, and it is also a tremendous amount of work for the youth participants, notably because youth are not used to being put in leadership positions, that they are really used to the top-down learning environment from school. And so even though the girl group wasn't taking place in the classroom or even in a school, the room was set up to look nothing like a classroom. Youth came in and they saw one adult and a bunch of them, and they assumed I was going to lecture on a topic, assign them work on the topic, and then pass a value judgment on whether or not what they did was good enough. And that was just absolutely not what was going to happen. But to get to a point where that wasn't what was happening required a ton of effort on both of our part. And a lot of that effort was relationship building. I was working to create a relationship with the youth where they were comfortable stepping up to lead. They were confident that I was going to support their leadership. And that initially looked like me going to the youth regularly, asking their opinions, and then committing to respecting those opinions and implementing them in the group as well. And so when we started the group in our very first session, we did a body mapping activity. This was an activity that helped me assess a baseline of where the youth were coming from, as well as understanding a little bit about what their interests were, what their passions were, and what their goals were. From this activity, I used a lot of these pieces to inform the different activities we were going to do in the first session, as well as conversations we were having just during the work during the first session. And so in the first session, we put a lot of time and effort into building those relationships, building those leadership opportunities for youth and getting them comfortable taking on leadership roles in the group. And that meant that in the second session, we could start with actually a way more direct youth planning activity. And so you can see that on the screen here. I gave the youth a bunch of different colored sticky notes. On the pink sticky notes, they wrote down different topics they wanted to address in the group. On the blue sticky notes, they wrote down different arts-based methods they wanted to use. If you're looking at this closely, you can see that on that day, I completely forgot the words for arts-based methods or art styles, as did all the youth. So we called them art topics. On the yellow sticky notes, the youth wrote down different people in the community they wanted to connect with. And on the orange sticky notes, they wrote down their different goals. And so this was something that was really cool. We left these sticky notes up in the room we were working in throughout the whole time together. And youth were able to see directly how their thoughts and ideas from this first session were coming into different activities we were doing throughout our time together. And this activity was so informative and so amazing, but I don't think it would have worked as well had we tried it in the first session before youth were comfortable voicing their opinions and voicing exactly what they wanted to do. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. So based on this youth-led planning and these activities, I am now going to highlight some of the work that the youth did and highlight some of the artwork, which I think is really the star of this presentation. As a group, we started a practice that worked really well. So before we were doing the art, we were either having a conversation or doing a small activity on the topic that the art we were going to do was going to engage with. This was really important because it ensured that everybody in the room had a good grasp of the topic we were getting into. It ensured that we were answering questions about this topic before we were getting into the art. It also gave youth an opportunity to share what maybe they already knew on the topic. If we had youth with extensive knowledge on these issues, it allowed them to step up and share that really liberally before we started. And it allowed us to set intentions for the artwork we were doing. And so this is one of the first activities we did together. It was called Self-Love Jars. And so we started with a conversation on what self-love was. What does it look like for different people? How do different people practice it? And why is it important? In these same conversations, I introduced the idea of the self-love muscle. And so this is the idea that self-love is like a muscle. It's something that you can train and build, and it'll get bigger and easier to use. And it's also something that if you don't train and don't build, it could get smaller and smaller, and it could get more challenging to use it or more strenuous to use it when you want to. And so with that in mind, the youth designed these really beautiful jars, and then they wrote themselves little notes that was going to help them stretch their self-love muscles in the future. We left the jars in the room we were working in for the full first session. And over that time, youth were invited to add notes to their own jars, as well as notes to each other's jars. And then at the end of the session, they were able to take those jars home so they could continue to stretch their self-love muscles at home. And then the pictures on the screen today, these were pictures that one youth took when we started doing a little bit of photography. She really was interested in trying to take pictures of these like glass jars that were designed to look beautiful. And so today, not only do I get to tell you about the jars, but I get to show you some photography from a youth as well, which is fantastic. The next project I want to highlight was a really, really important project for us. This was done in collaboration with Courtney Murdoch's Pathy Fellowship initiative, Girl Talk, for December 6th, which is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. This was a really important project for us in North Vancouver because up until this day, we've been focusing really, really, really heavily on self-love, confidence, and empowerment. And of course, in those conversations, topics or issues related to sexual and gender-based violence had come up. But this was the first time that we were going to name it this clearly and this directly. And I was really nervous about introducing such a heavy topic to the youth participants. And I was really nervous about how they might react to bringing up this really heavy topic that can be really scary or challenging to talk about. However, so in this project, we asked the youth to share what they wanted their communities to know about the safety of women and girls. And having that really strong foundation of self-love, the youth were able to approach this topic really gently and carefully and safely. And something that also really helped with that is knowing that they were doing this in collaboration with youth on the other side of Canada, who were committed to uplifting their voices, who were having the same experiences of them or recognizing different experiences. And so from this, we created this really beautiful poster that shares directly from the youth about what they need their communities to know. And this was a really beautiful experience for us and set us off really nicely to continue as a group addressing sexual and gender-based violence more directly. So the next projects or art pieces come from our second session. In the second session, we were spending a lot of time thinking about what we wanted to change about our community. How could our community become better for female and femme youth? And so we called this work Imagining and Reimagining Communities. And it started with conversations about what is a community? What are the communities we're a part of or have been a part of? What do we like about those communities? And what do we dislike about those communities? And in those conversations, we realized that the futures we were calling for might be limited based on our current understanding of community, and that we might need to call for something so incredibly radically different that we've never experienced. So in that, we started focusing on how youth would want to feel in their dream communities. And some of the ways they want to feel is empowered and safe and normal. And so based off these conversations, the youth created terrariums where they got to really build their own little worlds that represented these radically different futures or different communities that they wanted. After the terrarium project, we recognized that as a group, we'd had a lot of really important conversations leading up to it, and that those conversations contained information and details that we really wanted to share. And so we created this document. You can see the cover of it on screen now. This is called Girls Reimagine Community. And this is essentially the notes from our conversation, as well as a few creative writing pieces from youth, presented in an aesthetically pleasing way that we thought might be compelling for adults or other community members to read. And so based on the terrariums and the document we created and those conversations we were having, something that we kept coming back to was if we wanted to have these radically different communities and we wanted this to happen, we needed people to listen to youth. And so that is the theme of a cell film that the youth created. And I had initially planned on showing the cell film, but video over Zoom can be pretty hit and miss. So at the end of my presentation, we're going to share the cell film in the chat, and I would invite you all to watch it on your own and to join this conversation that we've been having and really deeply listen to what the youth are telling you in this film and consider how you might be able to enact that in your own communities in order to create those radically different and better futures for youth as well. And so this is one of our final projects we did together, building on the idea that we need people to listen to youth. Towards the end of our time together, we were really recognizing and acknowledging how important it was that the youth had shown up to do this work like week after week after week, and that this is really hard work. And it's really hard work that they didn't want to do alone. That this is hard work that they wanted to have other people doing as well. And some of the stakeholder groups that the youth identified as people they wanted to do this work included boys and young men. And so we thought about what it would look like to call boys and young men into the group, what type of partnerships we would want to have with them, and what advice we would give them moving forward. And so from that, the youth created these really beautiful collages that I'm so happy to be able to share with you today. And so for the end of my presentation, I have a couple things I want to share. The first one is, so I just showed you all this art. What was the point or the impact of this art? And so I'm going to talk about the most significant change. And this is the change that I identified as the facilitator. This is changes that youth identified and that their parents identified as well. And so from the 8 months in community, I think the most significant change was the positive changes among the participants themselves. I saw the participants become so much more confident. I saw youth who were shy and sitting separately transitioning to sitting at the main table with us and leading conversations. This is also something that the youth self-reported. They said that attending this group made them feel more confident, and it made them feel more confident in the knowledge they have on these topics, as well as their ability to connect with others. And so another really significant change is increased community connections. This is something that is so incredibly important, and that all the youth reported that something they really enjoyed in participating in this group was meeting people that they might not have had the opportunity to meet outside of this group. It was bringing youth together from different schools who are different ages, who don't necessarily share the same hobbies, so they wouldn't meet outside of this space. And that was something that was really important. And it was really important for a lot of the participants. And some other changes, so we talked about increased confidence. There was definitely increased self-love. This was primarily noted in a decrease in negative self-talk. When we started the group, when youth were thinking about sharing, they would often start it by saying, this might be dumb, but, or this is probably a stupid idea. And that's something we really worked on addressing as a group. And so that youth were then talking more confidently. And they weren't bringing themselves down before sharing things that we really wanted to hear. And youth were also better listeners. This is something they noted in themselves as well, is that they grew the confidence to know when to speak, but they also grew the confidence to know when to listen and to listen deeply and to take that information in before speaking themselves as well. And so the most significant changes in the group are just these changes among the participants themselves. And they're small changes, but like their value and the importance of them like cannot be underscored enough. And so finally, I want to talk about some lessons or highlights of the group. And the first lesson I want to talk about is the challenges, or what I learned navigating the ebbs and flows of youth-led work. So I introduced youth-led as the idea that's really important and that is really based in relationship building, and that is a lot of work. But I also want to talk a little bit about what it looks like in practice, because I think there's kind of the idea that in practice, youth-led work might look like every single week the youth are coming and they are leading an activity or co-leading an activity. And in fact, that's not what it looks like. And that approach to youth-led work is like pretty impossible. And it's impossible mostly because the youth participants I was working with are some of the busiest people I know. That on top of being students, they have a tremendous amount of homework. A number of them had jobs, and they also have responsibilities at home. And those might be responsibilities of caring for siblings or supporting their parents in one way or another. And they don't have the time to be planning activities weeks in advance or creating shopping lists for me even to go and get the supplies. So instead, in practice, what youth-led work really looked like was me having conversations with the youth participants about what they wanted to be doing in the group, coming up with ways that we could do that in the group. So for every single session, I had a topic planned, an activity related to that topic, and the supplies ready for us to do an artistic activity with the topic. And I was ready for every single group. And I was also prepared and ready at every single group to completely let go of that plan if that's what the youth needed that day. So if we came into the group one day and there was a conversation that a youth started about something they'd experienced or something they'd seen in the media, and the youth were pulling the group towards that topic, I had to be ready to go ahead and adapt on my feet and support it. Because in that sense, the youth were leading the group into a different direction that was going to better meet their needs that day than what I had planned. And so this was kind of like an organic approach to youth leadership or to youth-led work that was really important in practice. And in practice, I created a really good environment where we were able to address youth needs as they were coming up almost on a daily basis. A second thing I learned, or I want to talk about, is as the adult facilitator, was considering my positionality. And so in the group, the vast majority of the youth were youth of color. There was actually only one white participant in the first and second session. And then of those youth of color, a number of them were new immigrants coming to Canada within the last 3 years. And so with this in mind, my experiences in North Vancouver, my experiences with self-love, empowerment, and confidence, as well as sexual and gender-based violence, were not representative of what the youth participants had experienced or were going to experience. And it was so incredibly important that as the facilitator, I was aware of that and that I was aware that when I was talking about my own experiences, I didn't want to present them as universal fact or truth. And that can be hard because youth are used to having adults telling them things that are just the truth. And so in practice, it looked like finding guest facilitators who had shared identities as the youth participants, as well as actively finding ways in every single activity to honor the unique experiences of the youth participants. And this was like a really beautiful lesson I got from one of my previous bosses, Anurag Deer. And this was related to mentoring. And it's the idea that you can be a really good mentor to a mentee who doesn't have the same identity as you, as long as you acknowledge it and you position them as the expert of their experiences and as the expert of their cultural identity, which is something that I tried to do in every single activity. And I think that that was something that was really important for the group as well. The youth actually wrote their own surveys. And one of the questions they asked themselves is what contribution did you make to the group? And a number of the youth reported that their biggest contribution was getting to talk about and educate the group on either their home communities, their home countries and cultures, as well as the really unique experience that individuals with their shared identities might have when it comes to talking about issues related to sexual and gender-based violence. And so that was like a really key part of the group. It's something that I hadn't anticipated because leading up until the group started, I didn't know who the youth participants were going to be, but that was a really big part of the work in practice. And then finally, before I finish today, I really want to make sure that you aren't leaving thinking that this work is me talking with youth about really dark and heavy topics and then sitting in silence for about an hour while we create really dark and heavy art. And it's not to say that sometimes we don't have super serious conversations and that sometimes we aren't creating art quietly or gently, but more often than not, when we're creating art, we're doing it while chatting and talking and giving advice and telling stories or telling jokes and laughing really hard. And that this experience has just emphasized to me how important it is to do this work joyously, and that there is just something so important and so valuable about bringing young people together to create art on important topics, but doing so joyously and with laughter centered at the middle of that. And so that is enough of my presentation. That's enough for me. I'm happy to hand this back over to Dom and Courtney for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Emily. What a great presentation. So informative, and you really gave us a great look at what this year has been. I've been fortunate enough to kind of be along for the ride. I think we checked in with each other most days, but it's really, really great to see it all kind of come together like this. So as we kick off the Q&A, I would invite everyone to send in your questions and your appreciations for Emily, either through the Zoom chat or through the Facebook Live comments. Dom and I will be keeping an eye on both of those. But just to kind of kick things off, Emily, I mean, this work is clearly so impactful and had a really, really great effect for the youth that you are working with. And so as you finish up your fellowship year, are there plans for this work to continue moving forward? And what if any, involvement will you have in that?
Thank you. Before I get started, if anybody wants to turn on their camera, I would invite you to do so. I would love for this to be a conversation versus me talking into a bunch of little Zoom boxes with your names on it. If you don't want to turn it on, that's fine as well. But so yeah, actually just this morning, we got really good news that the North Shore Women's Center, where our project had been taking place, we won a grant. So we have $50,000 to continue the work for the next 2 years, which is great. It's really fantastic. And as much as important and beautiful this community work is, it doesn't happen without money. So it's very cool that we got to get that money. And so, yeah, so for the next 2 years, there is the funding to have this continue in North Vancouver. This is something that I'm actually passing over to the North Shore Women's Center. So they are going to continue themselves. I, of course, am available to provide support for the future facilitators, but I'm not going to be the future facilitator. And so that someone new that they're looking at hiring, and we are going to see what that looks like in practice and what my role as a supporter looks like in practice as well.
Awesome, and congrats for the grant, Emily. I didn't know that. And we talk often, so it must be brand new news.
Oh, I found out this morning.
Okay.
Yeah. Totally new news.
Okay. Awesome. A question that we have here is, can you tell us about the evaluation method that you use for your project? If ever you anticipate this being scalable and people wanted for you to sell the project, how would you be able to prove that it was a successful project?
That's a good question. I don't know if I would be able to prove that it's a successful project, because I think the different measures of success and the standard measures of success don't actually often apply to measuring whether or not what you're doing is impactful with youth. But the work that I did and the evaluation methods that I did, I think proved that. And so it was kind of a combination. I have a background in creative evaluation. That's something that I've been working on with the More Than Words projects for kind of 3 years now. But so one of the biggest things was ongoing observation. From the very first session, I started making notes and positioning myself as somebody who was able to identify changes as they were happening in the group. And then as we were coming towards the end of the group, I created evaluation surveys that were sent out to the parents, the guest facilitators, as well as the followers of the Instagram account. And so I have produced and co-authored a book on creative evaluation methods. I brought that into the group. We had it for a few months in the group, and the youth were flipping through it. And I was hoping that they would want to do some really fun and creative evaluation. But they actually decided they wanted to do surveys, which is fun, but it's not creative or as creative as it could have been. But they were really excited about the idea of writing surveys and filling out surveys. So on top of my ongoing observation, we had observation from parents and community members. And then we had the surveys that the youth wrote themselves and they filled out themselves. And so from that, I was able to evaluate what the impact of the group was on the participants themselves, as well as different community layers too.
That's great. And I think you're really getting at the heart of it, which is that the evaluation of this type of work is so personal. It's really hard to kind of take a broad look at it and say, yeah, this was successful or otherwise not. But I think once you really get an understanding of the group that you're working with, you understand. You understand their circumstance, you understand the impact that you had, and you're so great at that. We do have another question coming in the chat, which is, what was the most impactful part of the year for you?
That's a good question. I think kind of all of it was impactful. I think the biggest impact was in our final session. I asked the youth what they wanted to do, and they said that they wanted to have a pizza party and just hang out. And so that, like, their dream idea, and I was like, we've got a budget, sky's the limit. What do you want to do? They just wanted to hang out. And so that's like, I think just really representative of the like really strong relationships we built in the group, because that like their dream and what they wanted to do for the last day was just spend time with each other. And so that's exactly what we did. We just like hung out, we played some games, and we like talked for most of it. And see, this comes back to the evaluation piece, because I know for funders that is not a compelling answer. But what it really is what was the most impactful thing. And it's that I got to be a part of building these relationships with this many youth, and that they built relationships with each other in a space that we created together. And there's like, it's so hard to describe how important that is. And because that doesn't happen all the time. But I'm just so incredibly lucky that there were this many parents in the community who signed their kids up and let their kids come to this group, and that their kids came to this group each week with like an openness and willingness to build relationships and connections.
Awesome. And I have a question also. So, so can you tell us what was it like working in a community in which you grew up in? Do you think it had a hindrance, or was it only beneficial for that fact?
No, I think it's kind of a combination. As I mentioned, the youth that we're working with were youth that didn't have the same experience growing up in the community I did. So in some ways, it was really nice working in my home community because I had certain established connections. Like I knew exactly where we were. I knew where we were in relation to all these other resources and what existed. But I also think that growing up in North Vancouver, I kind of assumed that the youth coming into the group were going to have shared experiences that I did. And that actually wasn't the case at all. And so in that sense, being from North Van, having that assumption going into it probably set us back. That if I'd been more aware that in fact things were going to be incredibly different for everybody, I probably could have started us off on a stronger foot. So there's some ups and some downs in that sense.
And I think going off of that and considering positionality as well, as a young adult role model facilitator, you fill, I would imagine, a type of mentorship position for a lot of the youth that you were working with. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what that was like for you, how you came to understand that role, the impact that it had, anything like that.
Yeah, it's really stressful. It is so incredibly stressful to recognize that you are someone that this group of young people is looking up to. And so that's it puts a ton of pressure on you. And initially, I was spending a lot of time thinking about that. And then kind of as I was describing the messiness of thinking about the work you're doing instead of doing the work you're doing, I realized that I just needed to be in community, showing up and being myself. And that in that, describing somebody and showing up as someone who's doing their best, potentially imperfect, is really kind of a better role model for the youth than someone who's misrepresenting what's happening in their life on a daily basis or on a regular basis. And so in that sense, it was really challenging, and I had to kind of get over the fact that maybe these kids aren't going to think I'm perfect, but that's good. It's best, and it was really good that they realized I wasn't perfect. And so, yeah, it was a stressful position, but it's also a really privileged position to be in. To have kids who are looking up to you or youth that are looking up to you is really, really outstanding. And I had to recognize how important and privileged that position was. And so part of that is discussing my positionality, thinking about there are youth looking up to me, and I don't want to set an expectation that their experiences are going to be like mine, because already they haven't been, and we know in the future they won't be as well. So it was complicated. And then I also want to emphasize that the youth were as much role models for each other and for me as well. We had the youngest youth in the group was 12. Actually, she was bringing her little sister. So our youngest participant was 4, but the youngest active participant who was contributing most to the conversation was 12. And she started off the group so incredibly confident, never held back. Actually, from her evaluation, this is good. We asked if they felt more confident, and she said, I was confident coming into the group from the first place because I'm really good in social situations. And so she taught everybody in the group to get over themselves. She was like, yeah, we're here and we're all having fun. Why are you guys not having a good time? Why are you not laughing? And she was the funniest person ever, and role modeled for everybody in the group the importance of being silly and having fun and not getting too caught up on what other people are doing around you. So we created an environment that was really kind of egalitarian. So I'm their role model, but they're each other's role model, and they're also my role models.
That was awesome. Yeah, I remembering when we were in Nova Scotia, for those who are connecting, and this, we had Emily is very good with connecting with youth. She even within 2-3 days connected with 2 young boys who did skateboarding right beside our where we lived. And they actually came to her presentation at the beginning of the fellowship, and they were like, she's awesome, she's so cool. And they really used that language to describe Emily, which was a very rich moment for everybody in the fellowship. And so Emily connecting with community is not a problem. And it comes to this question that we just got from Claudia. So since the girls had advice on working with boys, is there a possibility that boys and young men would be involved in the next phase, or should that be a separate project?
Thanks for the question, Claudia. I think in North Vancouver, it would be separate for the time being. That I think given that our initiative is so new and the space that we've created just for female and femme youth in the community is so new, that the next steps would make sense to find ways that boys could come in on a short-term basis, and find ways that the girls and femme youth and boys and young men could come together temporarily as opposed to fully integrating. There is a lot of youth programming in North Vancouver that is for all youth. And the majority of the feedback from female and femme youth who attended is not great. And so I think it's really important to continue to preserve these gender specific and empowering spaces. And then little baby steps of starting to bring boys and young men in safe temporary ways, even if it's kind of like a 30-minute conversation, or even just thinking of these ideas now, like the projects Courtney and I collaborated on where we talked about what we wanted boys and young men, or what we wanted our communities to know, showing that to boys and young men and then bringing their feedback back to a group would be like a safe way to begin building those relationships even.
That's great. It's definitely not an easy step to take. And so really fantastic that you are thinking about how you can start to head in that direction and bring boys and men into the conversation. We're getting another question in the chat. So can you provide an example of how the girls in the group led or engaged with difficult conversations and what a trauma-informed space looks like in that context?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. So I think this is like a top of mind, but I'm sure you all remember that maybe it was a few weeks ago, that the night where the news that Roe versus Wade was potentially going to be struck down by the Supreme Court came out on social media. And this was primarily being transmitted through Twitter and then Instagram graphics after that. This was something that I hadn't planned on addressing. But when we got to the group that day, someone brought it up and they said, hey, I saw this online. What does this mean? And so this is kind of when I talk about the organic approach. This is a really good example of what that looked like. And the truth is, I don't know a lot about how the Supreme Court in the US works. I don't know a lot about what Roe versus Wade actually protects. And so as a group, it was an opportunity for us to go and follow this path. And this was something that the youth wanted more information on, what they were seeing on social media wasn't providing them the actual details that they needed. And so as a group, we did these things that we called virtual scavenger hunts a lot, where we would start with an idea and then they would look it up using their phones or iPads we had. And so for this, we started by looking it up and being like, okay, does someone want to start by telling us what we think Roe versus Wade is? And so we had a discussion on what we thought it is. And then we went and looked it up and we found different sources and different youths were looking it up so we could bring different ideas forward. And so this ended up actually being most of our session. I was talking about this specific issue and then also talking about how we had learned about it on social media in a way that wasn't actually learning about it, and critically thinking about how the information is presented to young people in social media. And then ideally, this resulted in them having the tools to kind of do something similar in the future when news or information like this is presented to them online. And so a trauma-informed approach to this day really looked like engaging with it gently and softly, and that this is something that can be really traumatic for young people to talk about, and that we don't know the experiences of everybody in the room, so that we provided opportunity for youth to share when they wanted to, and for youth to not share when they wanted to as well. And we ensured that nobody in the room felt like they had to disclose something for the sake of disclosure. And we also ensured that we took breaks and we had fun. And so we were having heavy conversations and we were doing this research, but we were also eating snacks and we were talking and we were there was the opportunity to draw or do other little bits and pieces at the same time. And so it's creating an environment that isn't super, super heavy, but where you can safely engage with those topics as they come up.
And I have one last question for you. At some point, I remember you talking about planning on hosting an event for parents and community members and to see their artwork. If I remember correctly, this did not fall through, and this fell through, and it was not on your part. It's because the youth decided that that's not what they wanted. So how did you react to that, and what was your learning moment or experience from that event?
Yeah, so typically in youth work that's using arts-based methods, there's this big piece of it that's a core component called knowledge mobilization, which is usually when the art is shown to other people. And when the art is shown to other people who can take it and do actionable items in the community with it. And so this is something that I had hoped to do. And when I brought forward the idea of showing our art to the community more broadly, the youth said no, they didn't want to do it. They had zero interest in hosting this event. They had zero interest in inviting their parents or other family members or community members more broadly to see their artwork. And so part of this youth-led approach meant that I was going to respect that. And so if they didn't want to do it, we weren't going to do it. And so in the first session, when they said no to doing this, I was like, okay, that's like a bummer, that's fine. But maybe in the second session, we'll do it. And then I brought it up again and they were like, Emily, did you not listen to us? The answer is no. And I was like, right, what am I doing? And so this is also like, it's the first year we ran this group. And so maybe in future years, they become more confident with it. But it was a really important opportunity for the youth to be able to tell me no, which is something that's hard for youth. They don't really tell adults no that often. And when they do, it's not often respected. And so this was actually a really beautiful opportunity for us to practice like informed and ongoing consent. And so when I wanted to show the youth's artwork, I asked them, can I show your artwork? And when they said no, I didn't show their artwork. And so this was something we did throughout the group the whole time. If it was to post something on Instagram, I asked every single time, is it okay if I put this on Instagram? This is where it's going to go. We have this many followers. These people are going to see it. Is that okay with you? And they got to make an informed decision about whether or not they wanted it going on the Instagram. And same with our presentation today. I had to get their permission to share everything with you today. And so you're also incredibly lucky that they said yes to showing those 4 pieces that I got to show you. But so yeah, like it was an experience of me saying I'm going to do youth-led work and then having to commit to doing it. And so committing to doing it wasn't pushing them. And then it was actually finding this like really beautiful opportunity and to see it as engaging and practicing informed consent with the youth.
So Claudia shares in the chat that this is really interesting. And in another project, the girls didn't mind having the work exhibited, but they didn't want to attend. The no is so participatory, which I think is really true. And sorry, I'll let you speak to it, Emily.
Oh no, it's exactly that. That part of the big reason the youth said no is they didn't want to be in rooms with their parents looking at their artwork. That was like, that made their skin crawl. That was a nightmare for them. And so of course we weren't going to make them do that. It just wouldn't make sense. But yeah, the no is so important in doing participatory and youth-led work.
Definitely. And I mean, there's an element of it feels very private. It feels very personal too. And so I think that not wanting to be in the room is often just embarrassment at somebody seeing that side of you. And it's almost a Band-Aid fix in a situation like that, or it can be. And so I think it's really great that they felt comfortable sharing that with you. And of course that you respected it and maintained that trust. I think we are approaching the end of our hour and questions seem to have slowed down a little bit. So Emily, I just want to thank you so much for your presentation. I hope that, well, I know that everyone has enjoyed hearing about your fellowship year and the incredible project that you launched. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us and to everyone who will be watching this recording later on. Please do consider tuning in for the remaining presentations this week. Emily is the last of today, but we'll be picking back up tomorrow morning. And if you would like to watch any past presentations, you can find them on the Pathy Foundation Fellowship Facebook page. I'll reshare the link to the cell film that was shared earlier that was created by the participants in Emily's group. And if you would like to connect with Emily after this presentation, you can reach out to her by email, which I will also post in the chat right now. I hope you all have a fantastic afternoon, and thank you so much. Emily, there are lots more appreciations coming in for you, so I hope you see those running by too.
I also just want to say thank you so much to Leanne, Grace, and Claudia, and Kelly, and my parents for attending, who are not part of the Pathy group. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.